in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Sapio with Buck Joffrey here again with my executive producer Ben Hyatt. Ben, thanks for again creeping back here and creeping back in front of the camera and asking him a question. I feel like it's useful because a lot of times I think, we've talked a little bit about one of the goals of this show, right? And the goals of this show in part were that we look out what's out there right now in the podcast ecosystem and for this kind of stuff. And to me, it seems like it comes in a few different categories. Either it's kind of way out there in left field, biohackers without really a lot of data or science behind what they're doing. I don't have a problem with biohackers, by the way. I mean, I kind of consider myself one as well, but you get into voodoo sometimes and that's tricky. And then on the other extreme, there's some really, really technical shows out there, right?
Way over my head, a bunch of stuff.
Well, and probably over most people who've not had, medical training but those are some really good shows, right? But what we're trying to do here is to, get some happy balance. And one of the things I think is important for us is like once in a while to break these shows up and say, hey, Ben,
Questions.
what kind of questions do you have? You're representing the audience. So
So I do have a question. I was at the gym the other day, and this made me, now I'm thinking about all this stuff all the time. And I noticed how many people use the sauna now at the gym. I don't think people used to a long time ago when I was at the gym. The sauna wasn't a big deal, but like it's literally to the point where people are lined up to use the sauna. And I want to know a little bit more about that. Like it's obviously not just about sweating out water, I guess, right?
yeah. Well, so it's interesting because there's actually a bunch of data in terms of the health benefits of saunas. It's not, it's real. The data is very, it's not like the randomized clinical trials, but you can see there's a bunch of studies in, for example, out of Finland, and I believe it was called the Kuopio Ischemic heart disease study. And again, it was, I believe, in Eastern Finland. And the reason that it's useful to look at Finland is because in the U.S., who uses a sauna, right? People with a gym membership. So
That's it. Yeah.
and if you have a little bit more money or whatever, sometimes you have saunas at houses, but there's a socioeconomic bias there that in Finland, it's so deeply ingrained into their society that they can look at it more freely there. But that study is, it's a pretty big study. It's like 2,300 people, if I recall. And basically what they've discovered so far, and it's ongoing, is that there is a significant benefit, certainly on the cardiovascular side. The way they did it is they tested for like how many times people went into the sauna, and they would compare, like if you went to the sauna once versus you went to the sauna 2 or 3 times, you went to the sauna, 4 to 7 times. So what you see is that like there was, if for people who use the sauna 2 or 3 times per week, there was 27% lower cardiovascular mortality than those who used it 1 time, right? And then if you go to like using it 4 to 7 times, then all of a sudden there was a 50% lower cardiovascular disease death than using it 1 time, right? So these are big numbers, right? And all-cause mortality, they showed people who are using it, frequent use of sauna is basically 40% reduction of all-cause mortality.
Wow.
So big deal, right?
Yeah. Was it just heart disease that they looked at, or did they look at anything else?
No, actually, there's a few other things. People who use the sauna 4 to 7 times a week had a 66% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and 65%, I think it was 66% of all dementia, 65% in Alzheimer's.
Wow.
So again, huge numbers, right?
That's incredible. What exactly do you think's happening in the body that you're talking dementia, heart, all these benefits? What do you think's why is it happening, I guess?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. Well, first of all, you think about it, and if you've been in a sauna, your heart's beating really hard. So you have an increased heart rate, you have an increased cardiac output, you're sweating, your internal temperature is going way up, right? So, and I'll get back to this in a minute, but I don't think it's a coincidence that those are the same things that happen with exercise,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But there's also these, molecular mechanisms that people talk about as well. And one of the molecular mechanisms that, that's often talked about is the release of or increase in the body of what are called heat shock proteins. Of course, it sounds great, right? With sauna, that you would have a heat shock protein. What does a heat shock protein do? What heat shock protein basically does is it goes out and it repairs damaged proteins. So why is that important? In some cases, when proteins are damaged, they aggregate, they turn into clumps of stuff. That's part of what you see in Alzheimer's disease with amyloid, right? So these heat shock proteins presumably are going out there and decreasing the amount of damaged proteins, trying to make things kind of nice and clean.
All of this is increasing these heat shock proteins. Are they in your body normally? Like, is this?
Yeah. I mean, they are. I mean, heat shock proteins are a normal part of physiology, but I guess increasing the levels of them is what one of the thoughts is in terms of, actually why they may be helping with longevity, in terms of like the effects on the heart, the effects on the brain, that kind of thing.
So then why is your heart also beating faster? Like, you're not doing anything, you're just sitting there. Why is your heart beating faster?
Yeah, so basically what you're doing is you are, you're there and the heat is causing vasodilation. So it's making these blood vessels open up and it's making more skin come towards the skin, that kind of thing. And so that increased volume of blood is causing effectively the same effect as having exercise, right? Like doing exercise where you're all of a sudden pumping more blood through your heart and you get a higher heart rate and all that kind of stuff.
So it sounds like it'd be good for your blood vessels as well then.
Yeah, potentially, right? I mean, and I think that's probably the mechanism, right, by which this is all working, because again, it's very similar to exercise. Yeah, the other thing is, going back to the whole Alzheimer's disease thing, and why would you have a decrease in Alzheimer's disease? Beyond the heat shock proteins, there's also increased expressions of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which we've talked on this show a little bit about before. That actually tends to increase neuroplasticity as well, so it may help with some of the cognitive benefits that people are seeing when they're in the saunas as well.
So another question on that. So how hot are we talking to get the benefit?
Well, I mean, saunas can go up to like 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and I mean, I've never done that, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't remember where those studies in Finland came, but typically when people are doing saunas, frequently I find that they tend to target like 160, 180 degrees.
Any downside to saunas then?
Yeah, there kind of is. Well, for one, if you're a man and you're trying to trying to have kids,
Yeah.
there's a fertility issue. Generally, sperm don't like
Hot.
that kind of heat,
Yeah.
right? So that's one of them. And then I would say generally for anybody who is not healthy enough for vigorous exercise, they may not be, healthy enough for saunas either.
Okay, so you think there's actually something to the whole sauna longevity thing?
Okay, so yeah, that's a very complicated, I'll give you a convoluted answer to that. I would say yes, but I think the effects personally that we're seeing, I think they're pretty much the same effects that you get from exercise, less the the nice increase in lean muscle mass that you get with exercise.
Right.
And what do I mean by that? Everything I just said, right? Everything I was talking about, even from the physiological effects of increased heart rate, sweating, increased cardiac output, heat shock proteins, BDNF, everything I talked about except for the sperm,
Yeah.
you see with exercise.
Yeah.
And so The tricky thing here, in my opinion, is trying to label this as a something separate from exercise that is creating a longevity benefit. And so I guess my take home on this is that, yes, I think that there probably is a benefit, but it's not any different mechanistically than exercise. And because exercise itself, and I'm talking about, this is moderate to vigorous exercise. That's what the sauna equivalent is,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
You're much better off doing moderate to vigorous exercise. Again, because when you're sitting in that sauna, you're not doing anything to increase muscle mass
Right.
and lean muscle mass and that kind of thing. And that's critically important if you're talking about the issue of longevity.
Yeah.
Because, what people die of when they're old, if they're not dying of heart disease and cancer, a lot of them are dying from, hip fractures.
Yeah. Falls
Yeah,
and
falls and
balance,
that kind
right?
of thing. So that's what I would say. So that's the good news. Now, for me, I love saunas.
Yeah.
I don't know if you love them,
Are
but
you gonna build one when you're?
well, I've got one coming,
Oh, you do?
actually. Yeah,
That's awesome.
it's been about a year. I think it's on some boat coming from China right now or something like that, or either that or it's still sitting somewhere in the harbor or something like that.
Yeah.
But I do use one. This is an interesting thing that I noticed though, because we were talking about earlier in earlier episodes, we were talking about continuous glucose monitoring
Yeah.
and all that. One thing that I thought was really weird was that when I was wearing the continuous glucose monitor and I went into the sauna, and I always go during the morning, and I'm
Okay.
fasting because I do the intermittent fasting, right?
Right.
My blood glucose spikes to like 160, 170
Just by being in the sauna.
by being in the sauna.
Wow.
Right. That is kind of a bummer for me, right? Because I'm now trying to figure out, wait, so net is for somebody like me, because my friends, I've talked to a lot of friends, this does not seem to happen to.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody else it happens to. I have dug on the internet and it sounds like it does happen to some people.
Yeah.
But this is where it becomes monitoring of your own stuff seems to be very important.
Yeah.
Right? Like I've got to be really careful. If I'm getting these huge spikes, then should I be going into the sauna 4 to 7 times a week just because the data in Finland says maybe I should? So in reality, what I do is maybe I go in the sauna like once, maybe twice a week now, because I feel like a couple of spikes is probably, not a big deal.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm looking into is that when I do it, there's also, in the morning, there's also a bunch of hormones that are released in the morning, like cortisol and all that, that increase the availability of blood glucose from your liver in the first place. So am I doing something at the wrong time? Am I doing it at the wrong time? Basically, just when this cortisol and all that stuff's getting released, am I going in there and amplifying this effect?
So if you do it later in the day,
It
you
could
might
be.
have
It
nothing.
could be. I need to test that. And if
Yeah.
that were the case, I will be very happy because I love being in the sauna.
This is the thing. So I do think the show talks a lot about data, and we're in an age of where we can get all this data, and like you said, every person is different, so everyone should be kind of looking at these things and see how it affects them. So
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think we've talked also about how not every human is the same.
yeah,
We talked about how with continuous glucose monitoring, like, some people eat potatoes and they don't spike, and other people have
you said
massive.
rice, right? You didn't spike on rice, or
No,
you?
well, it was specifically the Thai food I was eating at the time. So I don't know if it was, there's also a lot of sugar in those,
Yeah.
those
Curries and stuff.
curries and stuff that, especially with Thai food.
Yeah.
So it could have been that, but I know like if I'm gonna eat Thai food, it's gonna be a bad night. So I'll probably pop a couple of acarbos at that point.
Yeah.
By the way, I have not gone back to, retesting those things since I started taking some of those other like acarbose and some of these other things. So, but again, I think it's important though that last point about the blood sugar spiking in the sauna is like, just because you see a ton of data showing that something seems to be good for the general population, it's not necessarily always going to be good for you. So if you're really interested in, trying to hack yourself, you got to get data on yourself.
Right.
So,
And talk to your doctor.
and talk to your doctor
Yeah.
because none of this is medical advice.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take responsibility for anybody's health.
Yeah.
Here, I am a doctor, unlike a lot of the shows out there that are giving you the same advice or similar advice on things. But I don't want to give it to you. So
Without knowing you at least, right?
without knowing you, and frankly, I don't practice medicine anymore. I just study what's out there in the research. So.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's it for this little brief episode of Sapio. This is Buck Jaffrey with Ben Hyatt, and we'll see you next time.